going to go through some of the things that went on this week. Not all of it, because you would be here a while, but some of it. And we're going to be sort of concluding with kind of where we are. It's not the final plan. That won't come till next year. But it's the final for the week. I call this the end of the beginning. So this is the beginning of the process, and this is the end of that beginning. So from this point, we get to the middle. Okay, here we are. And again, I'm Neil Payton of Tortigalis and Partners. I'm leading this effort as the consultant team for the city of Diamond Bar. Next to me is Nicole Cotes, our associate project manager, who's been working very hard on this. Also from my team is Bettina Sasson in the back of the room. Also with me, with us this evening is Michelle Sinning. Michelle is with the firm of Consensus. They are a part of our team and really helping us with public outreach, with the website and those things, and help messaging, etc. So she's going to be here writing your questions down at the end. And then also joining us here this evening is Alan Compton. Alan is the founder and principal of SALT Landscape Architects. And Alan has been toiling with his staff on some landscape strategies, which you will see a glimmer of here as well this evening. So the team also has a lot of other people. We have a renderer who's been doing wonderful drawings. He had to leave and head back to his home in San Diego. Chaiwat Pilanen, many of you met him. We have another team member who had to leave early, Christy Kwok, for some family engagement. And then another team member, Brandon Diamond, who's been working virtually from his home. So it's a big team. Next. If you've been here before, you've heard me. So you're going to see, again, this is like previously on Diamond Bar Town Center. You're going to see some previous things. But again, there are new folks here. So, we've got to sort of get everyone to a similar level. We really view this as a kind of another panel in the history of Diamond Bar. As you come in, right out there is all these key elements, key moments in the history of the city, and this could be another key moment, the creation of a kind of urban public town center. Next. So here's the site, just to remind you where it is, at Diamond Bar Boulevard, which is kind of in the middle of the site, and then Golden Springs Drive to the southeast, and the 60 freeway to the northwest. The site is 45 acres, which, just for reference, is about 0.5% of the land area of the city of Diamond Bar. So it's really small compared to the city itself. I say that because we're not touching anything else here in this plan. It's just this 0.4% here. It could be very impactful, yes.
What stage do you take questions?
At the end. Is that okay? Unless you have something really super burning about this slide that you need to know.
I'm just wondering, is it this one along the 60? Does it go through the golf course?
Does the site go through the golf course? The site doesn't touch the golf course. The site is just what's outlined in red on this slide. So the site goes down to Prospectors Road on the kind of southwest, and it runs, actually also hits Prospectors Road up here as well. So Prospectors Road is kind of the edge at the two wings of the site, but no, it doesn't touch the golf course. There's a white circle around this site, and that circle represents 1/4 mile radius from the center to the edge of that white circle is 1/4 mile radius. Why 1/4 mile? 1/4 mile is about a 5-minute walk, if you could walk, as the bird flies. 5 minutes is about the length that most people will walk for pretty much anything. People will walk 5 minutes if it's a decent walk. Now, curiously enough, if you look back at the history of towns and cities, going back to the Greeks, this quarter of a mile or 5-minute walk was the basis for virtually every settlement that's been recorded. Because humans are still human, and we still have the same legs and feet, and quarter of a mile is a comfortable increment. So this is a diagram that we've done as a generic diagram that explains the idea of a neighborhood based on a quarter of a mile walk. And that neighborhood might have in it different types of things, even in that small dimension, from homes to slightly denser homes, to schools, to commercial activities, to a square, a town square. This is one of the characteristics of traditional neighborhoods. And in fact, great cities have been made by putting neighborhood next to neighborhood next to neighborhood until they form something much, much bigger. And so as we think about this quarter of a mile circle, we think about this as a neighborhood. And we think about all of the things that are within that quarter of a mile, even though they're not part of the site that we're looking at. So within this quarter mile is a school and is single-family homes, right? All of that is within here. There's a golf course right at the edge and condominiums, right? And more single-family homes and some apartments. So all of that is part of this neighborhood. But we're only working on the part that's in red. But we're going to connect, hopefully, to all. Next. Now, of course, easier said than done. We have 23 separate landowners here, right? Some of the landowners own more than one parcel, but we have 23 individual entities, sometimes people, sometimes companies, but each color in this map represents a different landowner. So when you ask the obvious question, how is this going to happen with so many different landowners? I will tell you that think about this not as the recipe for what will happen tomorrow, but as a zoning document, as a land use regulation that in effect acts as a template that will guide the redevelopment when it's ready to happen. When each individual developer is ready to do whatever it is they do, this will guide that development. And over time, with a plan that is flexible enough to accommodate the future, a plan will evolve, hopefully like the ones you're going to see today, if that's the will of the council. So that's how it will happen. So I want to be clear that it's not tomorrow. I mean, it could be, but it's unlikely. Next. I just thought I'd throw in some current events as of yesterday. You probably all saw this news. You may have wildly different opinions on whether or not this is a good thing or not, but I will tell you it will have an impact on urbanism and on city making. And the reason is because you simply don't need as many gas stations. And soon you will need none. That's a long time from now, but as we're going forward, there will be less and less people filling up their car with petroleum. And they will fill it up with electricity, which they can do from anywhere. They can do it in their homes, they can do it in a garage, they can do it at the parking lot of the Sprouts if there were electric things there. So that's important because there are 4 gas stations on this site. And it is unlikely that all of them will be necessary going forward. Next. So as those of you who've been here before have seen this, but we made this kind of tentative list of goals. And so far, they're pretty much still there. Make the town center a great neighborhood with a sense of place. So we talked a little bit about neighborhood a second ago. We'll talk about sense of place coming up. Physical design and programming that supports health and well-being. I mean, that's not a bad goal, right? Make the place walkable, which, by the way, ties in to the one before it about health and well-being. Provide for car light and car optional living. We mean we know people still use cars, but the idea that you could have a choice of not to all the time is something that a lot of people find desirable, particularly people who are under 40 years old. Great public places, parks, and regenerative landscapes, right? We all want experience nature, even when we're in an urban environment, have great places to go to where we can see friends, maybe have a coffee, enjoy life. Accommodate a range of densities and housing types and affordability. Because great neighborhoods can accommodate different people, different ages, different incomes. In fact, that's a good thing. And we know that part of the goal here is to ensure that we can have enough density that we can afford to build some more affordable and workforce housing, which many of you might appreciate, particularly if you have children growing up and wanting to move out of the house but wanting to live close. So having a range of housing types and prices is a good thing. And providing, of course, flexibility for the future, particularly for retail and commercial space. Like I said, this is going to have probably a long build-out period, so that flexibility is important. But particularly in retail and commercial, I mean, none of us can predict, the future of retail. I think 5 years ago, none of us could have imagined. 3 years ago, we would have never imagined COVID and what that would do to retail. 10 years ago, we never imagined what Amazon would do to retail. We don't know what other things are going to happen to retail, but we do know that the retail that is thriving now, really thriving nationally and in the LA area, is retail that has a sense of place. All right, it's experience. They call it experiential retail. You don't just go to buy something, you go to have an experience. You go to be in a place. You go and have food and beverage. So this is all important because you can't get you can get an order on the internet, but you can't have the same experience of being there, which is particularly important for food and beverage activities. And of course, it has to be developable in phases for the reasons, obviously, that we have so many landowners. So those are the goals that we identified, and people have commented on that. Nobody's really objected to these. Next. A sense of place. What do we mean by that? Sometimes I say it's in a characteristic that can't be, that when you're there, this could be no other place. There's something intrinsic about this physical location, the qualities it has, and even if you moved it, it would be different. So, we look at it as having 4 components. The way in which the different land uses come together, the quality of the public realm, which is the public spaces, the parks, the plazas, the squares, the streets and sidewalks are all part of the public realm. The character of the architecture, and the kinds of activities that go on in these places, whether they're kind of sort of happen by happenstance or whether they're planned. Farmers markets, petting zoos that are set up, tournaments, horseshoe tournaments, whatever. You can imagine a zillion things, art shows, whatever. Next. All of those form it. And so, there are a lot of great examples pretty close by, right? And we've heard some of these are very, beloved places. Old Town Monrovia, for one. Downtown Brea, Claremont Village, and maybe a little denser, downtown Pasadena. All of these are places that I think we all appreciate. Well, we may or may not want to live in any of these places, but probably a lot of us think highly of these places, right? And next. And so we looked at the relationship size-wise and pattern-wise between this site, which you see in the upper left, right? And these are 5 other places that we just identified. Monrovia, actually this is another one, Chino Hills, Claremont, Brea, and Pasadena. So we took the outline of our site and we simply overlaid it on these other places. So you get a sense of scale, sense of how big it is, what, the pattern might be. And one of the things you'll notice is that most of these have some form of a grid, a grid of streets. That's a really common thing. Most of them have a lot less parking lots, surface of parking. And because they have a grid, they have a lot more intersections. Right? So those are important in making the walkable place that we're trying to make here. Next. So I mentioned make it walkable as one of the goals. So I think everybody knows this, right? Walking is really important, and we don't walk enough. We, as in humans, particularly Americans. And interestingly enough, right, we actually evolved to walk. We are a walking species. And if we don't walk, we get sick. We get obesity. We get heart disease. We get diabetes. And in fact, this statistic, right, we will have chronic diseases that are 5 times the amount of communicable diseases. 50% of all doctor visits are related to lifestyle diseases. And one of the ways to combat that is to walk. It's that simple. Now, in these 45 acres, we're not going to turn all Diamond Bar residents into walkers. But we can have a hand. We can play a role. We can make it a nicer place for 45 acres, to be sure. Next. And, you know, and that's, so one of the things that make it, how do we make it walkable? Well, you have differing land uses. Remember that 5-minute walk? Wow, imagine if you have different things within that 5 minutes. You have things to walk to. That's important. Connections, easy connections. You can cross the street easy. You can ascend or descend a hill easily. Nice sidewalks with street trees that give you shade. This is more of a wonky thing, spatial enclosure. We like to be in enclosed spaces when we're out and about, because another evolutionary characteristic of humans is that we love edges. We are an edge-loving species because that provided us protection, because unlike some animals that have lots of ways of seeing, we don't. We have some hearing. Hearing is so-so, but it's not the best. So eyesight's very good, but it's generally ahead of us. So being at an edge gave us a lot of protection. And we tend to like that. So that's the spatial enclosure. The intersection density, I mentioned that in the previous view of those differing cities. When you have a lot of intersections, you make it a shorter walk for the pedestrian to get to an intersection to cross the street. And you also provide multiple ways for a car to get around, which means they don't have to clog up any one street or any one intersection. So it turns out having more intersections is better than having fewer, and yet classic suburban planning was to actually make very few intersections so that cars could speed along on the main arterial. And then minimize surface parking to somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 or 9% or less. That doesn't mean minimize the parking. You can put that in buildings, structures. But surface parking is horrible to walk around. People don't like it. It's hot. It's boring. And people don't really like to walk 5 minutes even to a parking lot. So when we say we don't like to walk much, oh, I hear this every place I work. You know, we Texans, we Californians, we Hawaiians, we whatever, Utahns, we don't like to walk much. I hear this everywhere. And it's because we design cities that are impossible to walk in. So of course nobody wants to walk. It's a rational decision. So if you make places people want to walk, okay, this is another place, a suburban environment we once worked on. This is what it looked like when we got there, and this is how growth was occurring. Now, aside from the fact that it was getting worse, it was chewing up the landscape, and it's pretty water intensive. Now, this happens to be in an area where water is not the big issue, but chewing up this pastoral landscape certainly was an issue. But I'll say it's also very water intensive. And, you know, it turns out you could take all of that new development and you could put it in the same land area as that development. And you could still have a lot of green. You could have more green, actually. And you could have a walkable environment that used a whole lot less water than that would have used. A whole lot less, because you don't have to irrigate all that stuff next. So this is the site again, and this is our sort of internal ranking of the sidewalk, of the walkability. Green means it's a really good walkable place. And there is a small section of Charrette Lane that is very nice. I mean, it really is. Now, it faces the back of the CVS, which is not nice. So that part, but this side of it is very nice. Technically, that's sort of outside of our site, but we claimed it because we wanted some green on this diagram. The red means there actually is no sidewalk. So, you know, that's, I would say, not so walkable. I mean, yes, you can walk in the street, but it's probably not the safest. And the orange or beige or whatever color this is, ochre, is kind of, there's a sidewalk, but it's not pleasant. And look, I think we all know that Diamond Bar Boulevard, you can walk down Diamond Bar Boulevard, but it's not a pleasant walk. And you won't do it unless you have no choice. But imagine if you would do it because it's nice. Can you imagine that? Next. So just some pictures from the site area. There is a place where there's an upper level and a lower level of the site. There's a staircase. That staircase, I doubt, is used very much because why would you? It's also kind of hidden. It's just not that pleasant. But we think you could make a more pleasant place.
Most people don't even know it exists.
That's actually true. He said most people don't know it exists. I believe that. We were touring the site. We found it because, you know, we were exploring. It has a bike lane on Diamond Bar Boulevard, of course, but I will tell you that it's a very unsafe bike lane. First of all, there's no buffer from the cars, but secondly, it actually straddles the gutter pan, which is incredibly unsafe. So, yeah, okay, enough said. Wide, very wide crossing here. Tough to cross that. Next. But imagine a great sidewalk. Because actually one of the things that makes people want to walk is a really good places to walk. So this happens to be Santa Barbara. People spend tons of money to go visit Santa Barbara because it's very beautiful. Now, part of it has to do with the buildings, all this kind of Spanish architecture. Everybody loves that. That's true. But I'm looking at a photograph here, and you can barely see the architecture. And it still looks really nice. You see a building edge, but you can really not see exactly what it is. You see some signage. What you're really looking at here is a sidewalk, right? With a lot of stuff. Nice palm trees, some other trees, lots of trees, basically. Plants, places for bikes, people sitting in a cafe, awnings covering the edge, small blade signs that are scaled for the pedestrian to see them, little balconies sticking out. All of that generous and wide, accommodating a number of people. A nice surface to the sidewalk. This is a great sidewalk. You can imagine people want to be here. Next. It didn't come by accident, by the way, that sidewalk. That was designed. It was a situation where the urban designers, the architects and landscape architects had as much say as the traffic engineers. And the goal wasn't to move as many cars through as possible. It was to make a good place that also accommodated the car. And that's a different mindset. And it's not the mindset that most American places were designed in after World War II. And because Diamond Bar is essentially a very recent city, it doesn't have that history, and it's got the history of late 20th century planning. By the way, this is just a comparison of the surface parking in those other places that we had looked at earlier, and you can see that goal is around 9–10%. You know, Monrovia is at 13, so it's pretty close, and Claremont's at 15, so also pretty close. You know, Pasadena is 5, but Diamond Bar's at 41%. So what that means is there is a tremendous opportunity. The parking lots are essentially land banks, right? They can be used for something else. Parking cars is one of them, but it's got potential to do other stuff, right? That's the great news here. Next. So again, we're gonna focus a little bit on some of the opportunities and then some specifically on the boulevard. So some of the constraints and opportunities. The big one, of course, is Diamond Bar Boulevard. Aside from the land ownership, which is obviously a big constraint, Diamond Bar Boulevard appears to be unzipped. So that sort of looks like, and we'd like to zip it back together. So it's kind of connected. It's got some riffs, some land riffs of topography. That's something we want to think about. A couple there's a prospector's comes through, but you can't get there because there's a fence. There's no way. It's not connect. But boy, this connects up to a huge neighborhood, but they can't get into here. I mean, there are some enterprising, probably younger people that have cut through the chain link fence and knocked it down, and so they managed to do it, but it's not considered. I don't think they're supposed to. Next. The opportunities, of course, are amazing. The opportunity is to, in effect, begin to construct the grid.
Prospectors?
Yes. The opportunities are to begin to construct that street grid that we talked about in other cities based upon essentially the natural drive aisles that exist in the existing shopping centers. They do start to form a pattern of streets, not completely, but you can start to see how a downtown could emerge. Again, respecting the different land ownership. But the other thing is you've got site opportunities, particularly from where those stairs are or near those stairs. There's a great view. On a decently clear day, you have a great view of the mountains from here. That's something that a lot of these places don't have. That's a placemaking opportunity big time, right? You can potentially connect here if landowners would be interested in being, cooperating with that, right? And, tie prospectors in and all of a sudden create a whole new way of getting here. So those are all opportunities, sort of making some signature place at the intersection of what is now the entrances to two separate shopping centers. Next. So I talked about, the stairs as like gold mine of opportunity. So these are just some stairs we love. The stairs are not just about going up and down a hill. They're about being there. So this is, if you've ever been to Rome, you've probably sat on those steps, the Spanish steps. And, this is a place where it's expected that you're to loiter. Loitering is actually encouraged because the place is the stairs. It doesn't hurt to have a Bernini fountain at the bottom and a pilgrimage church at the top, but okay, those are extra. But still, they don't have the mountain views, so there. This is Paris. These are much less grand. I don't know that many people stayed it, but probably a few do. But it's an elegant way to walk up and down the hill in Paris, right? And buildings are lining it, seeing it. And you could imagine instead of a Parisian city in the background, there were mountains there, right? Just picture that. And then this actually is downtown LA. So it's not as good, but it's pretty good. Now, you're not encouraged to loiter here. Actually, they will kick you out if you loiter. I actually think that's too bad. I wish there were people hanging out here and enjoying and eating and stuff. But, that's the way it is. But it's still a nice staircase. So next. So that's some of the opportunities. So I'm going to ask Alan to come up, Alan Compton, to talk a little bit about one or two this slide here and some of the ways that they were trying to get people to think about the place.
Thanks, Neil. We wanted to just start early in the week with a board that some of you were able to come and see. They just asked a few basic questions. We always like to begin these efforts by getting a feel for what the community is really interested in, especially as landscape architects. What are the open spaces like? There are a lot of sort of wishes and wants on the building side and the parking side, but what are the open spaces like? So our first board that we provided, we put up here, and it's on the wall now. Just to ask some basic questions, you know, thinking about plazas, gathering lawns, nature trails, pocket parks. You know, this is not an opportunity for us to make Central Park. The land is so valuable, and as Neil has talked about, there's just opportunities for a little denser urban fabric here rather than some grand park. And the city has some really beautiful, extraordinary big parks that are adjacent, that are easy to get to. So that's not really the driver here. But we were interested in finding out what were the sort of qualities of the spaces that you might want that we could get in here. And so, can we get the next slide? So you all, of course, can come up if you haven't already to take a look at the comments that we've seen. And this is exactly what we love. These huge, diverse set of wishes and wants, everything from water filling stations, water bottle filling stations to aquariums, you know, wishes for coffee shops, for restaurants, to outside. So we begin to really see that as a whole, people are really interested in an activated outdoor space. It isn't really about how do we get everybody inside the building and just use quick, fast walking sidewalks, but recognizing that the outside spaces are at least as important as the buildings themselves. And so we're collecting all of these and beginning to think about how we can stitch these together as the plans and ideas begin to emerge for the overall fabric.
Thanks. Alan will be back later in the show. Next. So we also conducted, our team member RC Elko conducted a market study for the area. Now, a couple of things. The market for retail in this area is pretty tapped out. I mean, it's got the right amount of retail. It may actually have a little too much, but there is unlikely to be any increase in retail. There could be changes in the retail. So one store might go and another come in because the retail is not actually reflective of the demographics that are here. And so therefore you're losing some sales tax, you're losing business to other cities, particularly in the restaurant, food and beverage world. So there just isn't the same level as there are in other places, and there isn't the same experience. So there is no place here to go to say have a nice meal and walk around and all that. It's you know, as you might in those other examples that we saw. In fact, we know a lot of people go to Chino Hills for that very purpose because there's a sense of place. But the market for residential is quite substantial. Now, this is not, these are numbers that our market analysts did. It's not necessarily reflective of what this plan will have in it. We don't know yet. But the market is basically showing somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000, 2,100 units overall, but divided among many different types of housing. Market rate. Market rate just simply means the stuff that anybody can go and rent if they can afford it. Affordable apartments. So these would be limited to folks with certain that are not above certain area mean incomes. For sale, right? But these are prices that are around $1 million. Let's say a townhouse or a condo. So it's not gonna be for everybody, right? It's for people who can afford that. And then some senior housing, but this is not affordable senior housing. This is actually what you call market rate senior housing, which is actually pretty pricey. So that's the market. Now, I will say this. Right now, your general plan articulates a vision of 20 units an acre or about 900 units on the site. I believe in your housing element, you've raised that to 30 units an acre, which would come to around 1,350 units on the site. Okay, so that's good. From what we hear from some of the land developers, that's not enough to make them want to do something. So that's the hard decisions that the city, are going to have to make. One of the issues is what's going to incentivize these 23 separate landowners, or not even 20, some of them, to do something other than what's currently happening. And of course, the incentive is money, right? The ability to make money. And you, the city, have this ability to, in effect, print money for these guys and gals, right? Because the zoning envelope that you allow is going to determine whether or not some of these folks want to redevelop. And they will do so if they believe that the risk of the reward from redevelopment is sufficient to overcome the risk of doing so, right? So tremendous power you have to incentivize and or catalyze that redevelopment. That's a big deal. And that's really all I'll say about that tonight, because it's something that's going to have to be worked through. It's not a simple thing. Next. The types could come in many forms. Row houses and townhouses and live work and courtyard and, 3-4-story apartment buildings and housing over retail and the like. All of that is out there, right? I think, you probably don't want to go too much lower density than a townhouse because you'll use up too much land too quickly. And so that's it. We're not, we imagine what we've seen written down is 3 to 5 stories is some people have said maximum 3, some said maximum 4, some said maximum 5. What we're going to show you tonight is all basically based on a 4-story max, which doesn't mean there couldn't be some 5. It doesn't mean there would certainly be some 3. So, you don't need more than that to achieve the densities that were just talked about. So, next. Okay, so now the kind of playing, if you will, the what ifs. And I mentioned earlier, we really want to think about Diamond Bar Boulevard because it is the thing that is, it's one of the big obstacles that it prevents connecting one side of the street from another as a place. And right now, it's a street that people drive through to get to the freeway, etc. Next. So we began to wonder, what if it could look like this? This is an early sketch. What if? Well, how would you do that? How's that even possible? But just what if? So, and this is a sketch of what could be Diamond Bar Boulevard, right? With bike lanes and people strolling and cars there, buildings lining it, right? This is an urban boulevard. Next. How would you do that? Well, this is what our traffic consultant looked at on the existing street. And so this blue is I kind of filled in after his diagram. The existing street runs from this edge, the edge of the blue, to the other edge of the blue. It's made up of basically 3 lanes each way, 12 feet in width, plus about a 5-foot kind of bike lane on each side. And then there's a median of 16 feet, which allows for left turn lanes. Well, 12 feet is entirely too wide for a more commercial neighborhood kind of street. That's a highway level of design. That's getting cars to move at 35 and 40 miles an hour, which I don't think is what you want here. So the first thing is to narrow the lanes to 11 feet, a perfectly fine dimension for the kind of traffic you want to, the speed you want them to go. So that already picks up 6 feet of land. Imagine if you then reduced the median to 10 feet, enough to allow the left turn lane, but no more. Because it's not about making a planted island in the middle, it's about getting the space to the edges where the people are. The planted island in the middle doesn't do anybody any good. So you pick up another 6 feet there. So now you've picked up something in the neighborhood of 16 feet. Now, within that, now added to that, so that's a lot. Now you say, 11 feet or 12 feet. Now the other thing that we've discovered is that the traffic issue that seems to be occurring is not in the middle of the street, it's at the intersections. That's where your problem is. So what if you then focus on the intersections and pick up the land you don't need in the middle? And so what you see here is a block in which we've gotten rid of the right lane completely. Well, that picks up another 11 feet. But then it brings it back where you need a right turn in and out, which is where the traffic gets backed up. You still have a left turn lane, and then you do the same on the other side of the street, right, in reverse. Now, we call that a road slimming, not a road diet, but because and that was an idea, the road diet was something that was brought up back a month ago, but it got us to focus on how to do it. And so this diagram, we believe, would actually result in zero difference in the performance of the road than it is now. Wouldn't improve it, but it wouldn't make it worse. Now, there actually is a spot where we think we can improve it, which is at Golden Springs, where two left turn lanes, we can get in here and not just one. We can even improve the left turn movements, even at the main entrance to the shopping center, by making them longer, which we've proposed as well. So we're picking up a lot of land by doing this. Next. This is found land, right? And so this is how that might go. 2 through lanes of traffic that are 11 feet, the center turn lane as it's needed, and then right turns where you have them, and when you don't need them, either a green or parallel parking, a wider parallel parking so as not to hurt the traffic movement. Why parallel parking? For a number of reasons. One is it provides a sense of safety for the pedestrians and the bicyclists that are behind them. And second, because it allows retail to actually exist fronting the street, because the parallel parking provides what's called teaser parking that retailers love on those kind of situations. So next. So this is a model view of existing condition. This is what you have now. Next. And this is what it could be. We're also showing the buildings set 10 feet behind the property line. Right now, your buildings that are on that street are way more than that. So that's not an issue. And they're actually then coming up to that 10-foot line. That allows us to have a sidewalk from here to here that is 20 feet wide. Remember Santa Barbara? With street trees and amenities and benches and even cafes on both sides of the sidewalk. Then a 5-foot bike lane. Then a 2 or 3 foot buffer between the bike lane and then what's next. Some landscape, and then either more landscape here or parallel parked cars. Right? So from the building face to the actual movement of the car, the moving car, is something in the neighborhood of 38 feet. But the sidewalk itself is 20. That's very healthy. That's a comfortable place to be. And you're looking at essentially 2 lanes of traffic each way going through, which a lot of streets have and work perfectly well as pedestrian-oriented streets. Next. In fact, the Champs-Élysées in Paris has 14 lanes of traffic and is one of the most pedestrian-friendly streets in the world. So it can be done when the sidewalk meets what it needs. So here's a view of that, right? Of what this could be. This is Diamond Bar Boulevard. This is doing exactly what we just outlined, right? And this is the kind of place it might be if you want that, right? And so I know you guys have done a complete streets plan. We're going to use in the next rendering the actual amenities, the streetlights that you've had selected, but we just didn't have them at this point. But this would be 2 blocks, 3 blocks of area that you'd come through and you'd say, I'm in a center, I'm in a place, I'm in downtown. Added to that, the fact that the 57 interchange is being fixed, we think that will help cut down some of the through traffic. And the other thing, and this is again a decision that you have to make, is do you want your town center to be a place that people go through or be a place that people go to. And if it's the latter, then this kind of thing is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Yes. If this is kind of, I'd like to wait till the end if it's possible, if it's like just a point of clarification, but otherwise, I'd like to wait till the end, if that's okay.
Just very quickly.
Yeah.
The heights of the buildings and
Yeah.
so on, are they schematic or are
Yeah, those are the schematic. Those are just things we plugged in.
okay, so it doesn't mean they are 5 or 6 stories.
In fact, this is what we're showing here is 3 stories. So in this side, yeah. But as I said, we don't see anything more than 4 stories here. That was what we've shown. We think you would need to get to 4 stories to do some of the town center stuff next. Okay, we want to do a similar work on Golden Springs, but we really haven't gotten to it yet. But this is just the beginning of that study. Next. And now I'm going to talk about some of the plan alternatives that we've come up with. What we did was on Wednesday evening, we showed, so I would call three and a half alternatives. Two of them were kind of the variations on each other. And then we took all of those and came up with a more refined plan for this evening. But this is from Wednesday. Alternate 1 showed essentially a town square. That you see an example of something like that could be like that. This happens to be in a place called City Center, which is outside of Houston, so it's actually not a center, but they made a center. And it's an amazing place because I've been there on a Thursday evening. Place is packed with families, with kids running around. The area around this is all suburban housing, but people come because it's a real scene, it's a real place in an area that didn't have anything like this. So we're sort of having something like that here, visible from the street. You could also extend it over to the other side of the street where the Smart and Final is. And that leads to kind of a main street, right, running north-south here, parallel to Diamond Bar Boulevard, with housing over retail. So the striped is kind of housing over retail, and the yellow is kind of housing, and the pure red is just retail. Maybe leading to a new civic building at the end. What is that civic building? Who knows? But something. We had this fantasy that it could be a city hall in a town center. Okay, I wanted to see if there were any reactions to that. Could be a theater, right. I just say why we thought a city hall would be cool, because town centers have city halls, and because you have a city hall here, very new, perfectly market ready for any office user. So it's not a huge jump to imagine this being repurposed and you all selling and creating a new city hall and library, etc. Visible from the freeway.
What sort of dimension?
Oh, don't worry about that, sir. We haven't designed it, okay? We have not designed the city hall. If that's something that you really are interested in, we could work on that. But at the moment, it's big enough. But visible also from the freeway, which we thought was cool. Okay, next. So this one is a little different. It's more of not so much the big city square, but it's more of a retail main street running east-west here. And then north-south is a new kind of street that we modeled after a place in Barcelona called Las Ramblas. And it's kind of an esplanade. There's a middle island that runs up and down. And actually, you don't have to go to Barcelona to see something like that. You could go to San Jose, and there's a place called Santana Row that uses the same exact device. And you see that here, right? And the stuff in the middle of it's very cool. But look what we've also done. We've connected it to a stair sequence here from the upper level, so that this property could create a stair sequence that fed this lower piece and had a view of City Hall in the background. Next. Oh, this is just some of what it might look like in the courtyard of the housing. Next. So we also had an idea that you could use the same idea, but move City Hall to the end of this. You know, there's a lot of good places for City Hall here. So you could move it there, you could have it here. So otherwise, it's a similar scheme. It has a small town square up here in front of the Smart and Final, but otherwise, it's similar. Next. So here's a view of what that might look like. And wow, you know, imagine, you know, instead of Rome, you have the mountains. I mean, that's a pretty unique opportunity. So now there's a windmill in there. Yes, the windmill has been moved. Actually, in all of these, the windmill has been moved. In fact, the windmill shows up in several different views in different places. So it's like, where's Waldo? I don't know if you could remove the windmill, but it's a thought. Now, I know that this is the one with City Hall at the end, which it vaguely, in many ways looks like the Pasadena City Hall, but miniaturized, but that's just a placeholder. We don't know the materials yet. Just, okay. Next. I'm kidding. Okay. And here's one more we did for the Wednesday night, and this one moves the City Hall and library yet again to the other side. And it's not like we're obsessed with this building, but it also provides a jumping off point for other things that you might do, right? So it's a prompt for us as designers to think of other ways of organizing the site. So in this case, the City Hall is where the Smart and Final is, and Smart and Final gets moved to the side. It's all wrapped in a colonnade that wraps around the Smart and Final and other retail and the City Hall in a miniaturized version of what used to be known as the law of the Indies towns. So when the Spanish were settling the Western Hemisphere in their part of it, they actually issued these laws of how towns should get formed. And they always had a square in the middle of them that was colonnaded. None were actually done. Sonoma has some aspects of that, but doesn't have the colonnade. But there are no other real good examples in the U.S., but there are a few in Mexico and Central America and South America. So this is a miniature version of it because theirs were much bigger, but it's sort of the end of the main street. There's also a plaza here. So City Hall is at that end. We have another main street. Now the stairs have really gotten like expressive. They're getting bigger and bigger. And there's a whole traffic moment, circle here, and it's the whole thing with that. So next. Go back for a second. The other thing is we're really starting to make a second street, perpendicular street. It's really starting to create that grid of streets that we talked about earlier. One of them might be a retail heavy street. This might be a residential street, purely residential. So different kinds of streets. Next. And here's a view of what that entrance might look like. So this is an entrance of that main street from Diamond Bar Boulevard, right? Very active place, people living above the store. These are, as you can see, 4-story buildings, 3 of residential over retail, but some would be just 4 of residential. And you can see we have here the Diamond Bar and Grill. So, and next. And here's one of those residential streets, very narrow, tight. This is almost European feeling in its character. Actually, in hot climates, narrow streets are really good because they actually provide shade. So what you find when you go to hot climates in either Europe and Spain or North Africa is the narrow streets because that's what feels good. Next. So all of that led to this scheme, which we're calling Alternate 4, which combines different aspects of different schemes because, you know, there's just so much to choose from. So we tended to go with the original idea somewhat of the town square in the middle here, with City Hall opposite that, or a civic building, a theater, it could be a movie theater even, but something prominent. In this situation, the City Hall would probably be lined with some small retail, because city halls aren't really retail friendly and want to keep that activity going. So coffee shops, et cetera, that might be open even when, they're almost like detached from the building. You see the stair now is shrunk. It's back to a normal size, but it's still grand and it's still on axis. It's now a street and not the Esplanade, but you'd still get that view. Housing over where we had City Hall for a while. The hotel has always been here. By the way, in all of the schemes, we create this new street here from prospectors. We've actually spoken with the architect for this site. And we've actually worked out the dimensions of the street that could go here that make this work. And it's the one site in the entire place where I have some confidence. I know it's not that significant a site in terms of the effect on the plan, but you got to start somewhere, right? And I mean, he's been in like 3 times this week. I mean, we literally worked out the dimensions. So it's very exciting. So again, another kind of the residential street. You come in from Torito Street. You come in and you actually get to a town square, another little village square, neighborhood square here, right, with some retail fronting that. You come around that. There's another kind of retail building here. This is probably the Smart and Final with housing above, right? This is sort of where we are. There's another sort of a grand stair at this end. So, that helps to animate that side of the property. The hotel remains, of course. So that's what we've got. We've got streets coming down here into another neighborhood square. So lots of little neighborhood squares, neighborhood places that create sub neighborhoods, like here and here and here and even here. So a lot of engagement at a very, very local level, and then, connectivity to the larger whole. So next. So just, what that square might look like. Next. Some of the other uses and activity and looks that could occur. Again, here's the Spanish Steps. Retail, this is supposed to be a city hall. It's pretty grand, probably bigger than we need here in Diamond Bar, but,
Big enough.
I think it's big enough. Probably a little extra big. Really some great street, some special street activity and stuff you could do. This happens to be if you ever go to Denver, this is an area of Denver called Cherry Creek. It's a really cool kind of place. Theater, this could, if it's not the Smart and Final, this could be a whole new theater there. So, you're not locked in. It's not like any of these activities have to be in any of these places. What you're really creating is the template for these kinds of different things to occur, right? It's not fixed. And cities are like that. And that's one of the great things about a street grid is it allows virtually anything that you want to pop up in any spot in the grid. Next. So, what would be phase 1? Well, luckily, we kind of feel like there could be a phase 1 based on everything we know. And we think that phase 1 could be on this site right here. And the only thing is that you'd want phase 1 to be the catalyst and the kind of moment that lets you see what's going to happen in the future. So imagine doing phase 1 and you have this grand stair and it leads to nothing right now. It leads to the back of a building and a kind of service alley. Who would do that? Right? It doesn't make sense if that's all your vision is. But if your vision is the larger, then you understand why you have to do that, even though it might not connect for a while. And that's what a plan does, like this. It allows those bigger visions to be implemented over time. So, I'm not saying this is exactly what it should be. The developer will have their own plan. I would hope that the developer could be encouraged to see that opportunity and to make that happen. The other teeny little thing, you probably can barely see it, is this little, see there's a little bit of the color there? what is that? Okay. That is like, you ever seen those pop-up container stores and restaurants, that are happening? I'll show you a picture. Here they are, right? You take these shipping containers and you sort of put them around the site. And, and so the idea here is you take a few of these shipping containers and you put them around a little plaza in the middle of the parking lot. And all of a sudden, you've got a little place, a little plaza that was formerly a parking lot. Now, I'm sure Sprouts would have something to say about this because it's kind of in their parking lot. So that's a detail. We have to work that out. But, okay, I don't know exactly what the form of this will be, but if we could start to give a little hint of coming attractions through pretty entrepreneurial and opportunistic kind of situations like this, where you're making a little place just by the location of a couple of things that serve some food, and all of a sudden people go there. That's what I'm talking about. So, next. So there it is again, back to the original. Next. So, one of the things about this plan is you can focus on the buildings, which is all the program we talked about, but we also want to focus on the stuff between the buildings, the streets and the squares and the places, because that's what everybody will appreciate. Because even if none of you ever live in this place, you can go there and experience these places. And that's so important, because right now in the typical American suburb, usually you don't go to places to just experience them unless you live there. But here you could go to the town square to hear a concert or a film, see a film that's being projected. And so that's what this diagram identifies. And now, Alan, come on back up. We're almost at the end, folks. You'll have a lot of questions, I know, but we're almost there. Here you go.
My first time here, I didn't even know you started this.
What's that?
I didn't even know you started this a month ago.
Oh, really? Okay. Next.
Thank you. Let's see. So when we work with Neil on this kind of planning effort, as he pointed out in the previous slide, there's a lot of areas that are green. So how do we approach them? How do we think about those? What are the big ideas that we would bring to those other than let's put a tree and let's put some shrubs, because that's a little generic. So we always like to figure out how we can come to a place to use the landscape to help create a sense of place, but also an acknowledgement of history. And so there is so much rich ecological and geological history here in this community that we really didn't have to look very far to find inspiration. The history of this space relies so much on the chaparral, the oak woodlands, the sycamores that are in the riparian areas. And not that we're going to reproduce all of that in all of this sort of dense urban grid that's being proposed here, but there's inspiration there, and I think a lot of pride in the natural environment that exists that surrounds all of the homes and the parks and that sort of laces throughout the community. So we felt like that was really an important thing to try to find to bring back. So that as a broad approach to look to the natural environment as an inspiration for what to bring into this new zone. We also know that there's such beautiful topography here in Diamond Bar, so many hills that provide vistas, they provide views of ridge lines. It really creates a very dynamic sense of space as you look up at homes, as you look down into sort of the canyons. So all of that's really rich. And while it isn't super dramatic, there is topography here in the site. So our question often is, how can we take advantage of that? Neil's already talked about how the stairs at one end provide a high point to look out and possibly look across the site to mountains beyond. We know there's another grade change down here. How can we take advantage of that? There's still some slope on this side of the site as well. So we really want to think about how we could utilize those. That could be for conveying stormwater. It could be for capturing and cleaning water. It could just be for how we express the movement across the land. So similarly, as I mentioned earlier, looking to the natural environment, how do we bring that into the city? We're going to put them in sort of controlled planter environments. We're not going to create a great sort of wilderness, but how can the natural surroundings that you all are so familiar with be echoed in this space? So those are some of the ideas that I think we're thinking about as we work here next. And again, Neil has already shown some images of the sort of placemaking. These are just a couple of the ideas. He's already talked about how we might have a gathering lawn. Looking at the spaces along the front of Diamond Bar Boulevard with that super wide sidewalk, when he showed me that today, was extremely exciting, because not only can we get big canopy trees, maybe in some places we could have a double LA of trees, which is super magical on a sidewalk, but it just gives us an opportunity to put more landscape so it doesn't feel, it's such a really beautiful mix of a 3-story building, it's got retail, it's got coffee, it's got a place to sit, to have that coffee under the canopy of trees, to look through things. So we think that there's a really rich opportunity there. There's also sort of opportunities possibly for bioswales and adjacent to bike lanes that come through. And of course, as we look for various places for plazas and terraces, how can those be beautifully landscaped? Signature big trees, maybe in the early stages, we'll see how the developer feels about it, but is there an opportunity to put in some really large signature trees that are a great starting point? We all often feel like we're not quite patient enough to start with a smaller tree. What if we could bring in a big one to really, that can make a place on day one. So that goes in the tree, into the ground. You've got a 30-foot tree with a 20-foot canopy. It's a great place to start. So anyway, just some initial ideas on the landscape side.
Thank you, Alan. So here's the plan once again, just to remind you what we did, and that's sort of the conclude. We end with this slide. Next, this is the ending slide, only because. So this is the thing that you don't need to worry about the 23 developers. Well, for the building edges you do, of course, but for the street itself, you don't need to worry. We don't take any right of way. It's all within the existing right of way. So this is something that you can think about as a city, to control the quality of your infrastructure to support a range of types of mobility, including humans on foot. And that's it. So now we're ready for questions, comments, etc. Thank you. We can turn the lights on, I think. And we have, we need to get the microphone. Do we have the other mic? I have one. Oh, here it is. So can you be the mic person? It didn't happen unless it was mic'd, so we have to give you the microphone. Good.
So it just resonates with me. What you're talking about is the boulevard changes there, which is mostly in the city's purview. So why wouldn't that be phase one?
That's a great question. Couple reasons. I mean, it could be, but it's a lot of money. And I'm sure the city is already looking at grants and not that, but will the grants cover it all? I don't know. So there might also be some fees and things that developers are paying into that will help with that. The other thing is you don't really want to get too far out in front of this. So I might think of that as phase two, doing it in phases. Actually, what I would really do first is test it with traffic cones. Like put some cones out there and see how people respond, and see, what it does. But then I would maybe do a piece of it as phase one, and continue, because you're going to do all of that, and if other developments aren't occurring for a while, you're going to have this beautiful boulevard with nothing framing the streets. So that kind of will be a drag. So you want to you'd like to keep it somewhat in sync with what you imagine your development will be. But I mean, it's a great question, and it's a detail that will have to be figured out.
I think parking would be the other piece, right? Because you can't expect probably these developers to quickly rebuild and reconfigure their program, their spaces, if they're using up their current parking space and they have nowhere to send people, right?
Sure. Well, typically the way these things get worked is that to do the redevelopment on any of these commercial sites, they're going to have to close down those sites and redevelop, because it's really impossible to build while you're trying to operate a store when you don't have parking for it. And typically it's just the way it has to happen. And that's the risk. You're asking somebody to shut down the income they're getting for 2 years for the promise of something bigger. The bigger is some density.
But would they be doing their own parking, or
Oh,
is
yeah.
the city?
Yeah, no, they would be doing their own.
The city won't do a parking
Well, you could
structure.
do a parking authority or a parking management district. You could do that. I mean, so typically, in the residential kind of world, they will do their own parking.
Right.
And that's just part of it. If it's doing a mix, then there might be some parking in lieu kind of fee. The city could manage it. It could be a property owners association that manages it. So there are a number of ways of structuring the parking garage construction and its financing, but it's probably private, but you could do a city-managed program. I mean, Pasadena does it as a city-managed program. Santa Monica does it that way. So all the development is paying into a bank instead of building their own,
Right.
and then the city builds the parking in central locations.
Okay, thanks.
Right here.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
What I was wondering, if similar, were there parking garages on those?
Yes.
So there's actually garages, and how many spaces? Were they
Yeah, they'd be above-
underground?
Yeah. So typically we would have above ground garages, though there may be exceptions to that where you have the grade differences and you could absorb some of the grade with parking. So that there are some unusual situations here that might make some underground parking reasonable. But typically these would be above ground garages, but they would be wrapped by buildings, so you really wouldn't see them. There'd be signs that direct you to where they are, but you would never see them because parking garages really aren't great things to walk by either. So that's how it would work. And so actually they were in this plan, but a lot of times you couldn't see them because we also put building on top of them. So you just, it's one
Okay,
plan.
I didn't know what they looked
Yeah.
like. And then my other question was, I didn't understand the whole -9% parking thing.
Yeah,
So
okay.
what the?
Not negative, it's basically the amount of land area. So one of the thoughts that's become kind of a accepted wisdom among people who do what I do is that the maximum amount of area of a place, of an active place, there should be no more than 9 or 10% of the land area devoted to on-street or on-surface parking, like parking lots. If it's more than 9 or 10%, the theory goes, it's not going to be a good place. Okay? And so what you saw was that places like Pasadena are actually under that number, and some other places are close to that number, which, it's an estimate. So Claremont and Monrovia are both pretty close to that number, whereas this particular town center is 4 times that number. So, I mean, we knew that going into this. It's the parking lots, that's what you have to have. So if you can put those cars in a garage, then you have all this land to develop, you stack them, multiple floors, and that's the theory.
If somebody else has any questions, I've got a few questions.
Well, tell you what, ask one. Can you ask one, and then we'll take turns?
No.
Okay. Fair enough. Yes, I did.
I'm sure because of laws and everything, this has been taken care of. But you spent so much time talking about the stairs and so forth, which I think is a good idea. But having a mate who is in a wheelchair,
Sure.
I'm sure, all of that's going to be taken care of in that.
Thank you for asking that question, because it was actually something I meant to talk about in my hour and 15 minutes, but somehow didn't get to that. Well, first of all, the law is, as you said, the law requires accessibility. So that's not even, you don't have to even say it. I mean, you should say it, but it's going to have to happen. But there's accessibility, and then there's going beyond what the law says. And we had an individual came in and really gave us a whole list of things that aren't the law, but would be nice to do, all right, to make it even more accessible. So, for example, We could have a ramp that started at the top of the stairs, went out this way, came back, and landed at the bottom of the stairs. That would be perfectly legal. We get start and stop together with the stairs. But in the middle of that journey, that person in the wheelchair is by themselves. But what if you could link the two together? So the law doesn't say you have to do that, as long as the beginning and the end are fine. But if you link them together, then you could literally walk with your partner. So that's even better. So other things like, how you make folk aware of the landscape that Alan's going to provide. Could you have interpretive signage than Braille? You don't have to do that, but wouldn't it be nice? Things like that. So there's a whole package of accessibility overlay that we haven't even begun to explore, but would be.
I was wondering thank you for the presentation, and it's really developed great, very nice to see. I'm wondering for the Diamond Bar Boulevard and the design that you showed, it sounds wonderful. I'm curious, right now on Diamond Bar Boulevard, there are a couple of bus stops. And how would the bus stop, at least one bus stop, be continued so that there would be the able to be light or optional
Absolutely.
car, and also easy access for pedestrian to navigate to and from it?
Sure. Well, we have to talk with the bus operator to look at that for the bus stops itself. We have to see if if we haven't yet accommodated it, we have to see, can it be moved? Is there a reason it can't move? It's a bus, not a train. So, and if it can't, then we have to accommodate that. It's a detail that we haven't gotten to, but we certainly need to accommodate the buses. My gosh, I'm a big proponent of transit. So yes, I don't want to eliminate transit. I want to actually make it easy to get to, but we just haven't gotten to that detail yet. But we will. And thank you for bringing it up because it's important. Yes. Thanks for coming.
I can be loud enough without it.
Yeah, but they got to pick it up in there. And thanks for coming.
Okay, so you mentioned we have an intersection problem.
Yes.
And I think of it as a freeway problem.
It might be.
I drive those lanes constantly. A lot of times, even the middle lane makes the right onto the freeway. People are cutting off. It's just all three lanes don't move. So I like to know how do we work it out with just two lanes now going in that direction?
Yeah. Again, it's an intersection issue because that's where it's happening.
But okay, so that's what I don't get.
But you know what? What I can do is I am not knowledgeable enough on this
Okay.
subject, so I would need to get my traffic engineer to
All
talk
right.
with you.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm happy to do that if you'd like, because otherwise I'll just be making stuff up, which I really don't want to do, but I have not been known to do.
Hi, I noticed that you have on your proposed plan the hotel in the back.
Yeah,
Well,
which
can
is
you
where it is
discuss-
now. Yeah.
Okay. How would that affect basically sustainability and eco-friendliness, especially with the earth is being, damaged over time? And how do we kind of make sure that we keep the landscape? And Diamond Bar is known to be a countryside, and how do we preserve nature, and how do we basically make sure that we're not harming the environment by increasing carbon emission, carbon footprint? Because you said you wanted to bring people to come in instead of just driving by. How can we make sure that we're protecting the environment by bringing sustainability? And also another thing is, how do we make sure that we're keeping the community close and homey instead of it being kind of not capitalist, or it's kind of basically like a cookie cutter where, Brea and every Chino Hills, and how do we make sure that we're actually making sure everyone is a community instead of it being we just go and shop and we don't have, small events to make sure that we're maintaining that community, just like, movies under the stars. How can we make sure that we're maintaining that community instead of being every other, downtown?
Well, that's two great questions. And let me start with sustainability. Because you mentioned the hotel, and there's a hotel there now, so all we're doing is keeping the hotel there. So that's really not a change. There isn't a whole lot of nature on the site at the moment, right? It's parking and buildings. There are a couple of trees. So
When you have 3 stories and 4 stories, your picture's showing like the view up.
Yeah.
Instead of facing at a point of view.
So-
how would that affect, even though you're having trees and shrubs, how can that, make sure we're providing that?
So the most sustainable environments, physical environments, are urban, because people can live near each other and don't need a car to get to a store. And so literally the most sustainable place in the United States from an energy point of view is, guess where? Exactly, New York City, Manhattan. And it doesn't look it, but it is. People use less heat than they do in other northern cities because the walls are actually insulating each other. And they walk a lot more and drive a lot less. Now, I am not advocating that. Okay, so please, I just want to point that out. When you do what we're showing, we actually have green, all kinds of places that will allow stormwater to filter into the land itself and be cleaned before it goes into a storm system. That is not what's happening today. Right now, that water is running off into a storm system just as it falls and runs across the asphalt, picking up every imaginable chemical known to mankind, including some that are highly toxic. So what we're doing is actually making sure that all of that water that drops on the site can actually get filtered and therefore be clean once it goes into the storm system. The buildings that are there will meet, at the very least, Title 24, which is California's energy code, which is being updated in January of 2023, all right, to mandate certain performance that will exceed anything in the United States. That's the law now. So all new buildings will be that way. That's a second. Third is, unlike Chino Hills and Brea, we actually will have people living above those stores, not just shopping. Some of the people on the squares there, they'll be residents there, right there. It could be your brother or mother or whatever that's living there. You'll go to visit them because that's where they live, right? How cool is that? When you go to visit this place, there can be national chains and local stores because the people living there will also want those as well. So I think all of those will be important both for the sustainability. People can walk once they're there. They can park their car and walk around because it's all very walkable. Or they can live there and walk to the grocery or to the movie theater or whatever activities are there. Better than getting in a car. We're even improving the bike lanes in that area so that someone actually would feel safe to bike there. Because right now, I would not feel safe to bike in those bike lanes. No way. So that's a huge win for sustainability, encouraging that. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if you could do that further up Diamond Bar Boulevard? But, you got to start somewhere. So that's all part of it. I mean, I don't know if that's enough for you, but we could do more, and we could strategize that. But I can tell you that the shopping center paradigm that we've got there now is the most unsustainable environment that we have. We actually can almost make it not, it's almost impossible to make it less sustainable than that.
But I think we just want to preserve, the landscape, and also when you have so many distractions, you ask yourself, how many times do you walk around downtown and you actually enjoy the scenery around you?
Yeah.
We just want to make sure we preserve it, especially in the community in Downtown. We don't want it to be,
Sure.
like a city base and, where everyone can come and go and not really actually
What-
appreciate nature.
When Alan spoke, he talked about actually bringing that landscape back into the site because it isn't actually there now. But what if you could? What if you could, the nature that you're aspiring to, which is wonderful, but isn't here, at this 45 acres, what if we could grab some of it back? And yes, it's a city, it's a little urban place, but it still would have the native trees, the native plants, some of the rocks and physical soil of the place is here and is part of that experience. That could be cool, I think, and better than Brea. I'm biased. We had nothing to do with Brea. That's why I'm saying it. Anyway, I don't know if that does it for you, but we'll do our best. I mean, I think that's important. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. There's a man in the back. Sorry.
Okay, that's for me back here. Okay, I've got several questions. I'll try to keep it simple. Speaking of native gardens, native plants, and so forth as part of this, we know that climate change is here right now. We don't know where we're going to be in the next 20 years. California, of course, is pushing for the electric vehicles and so forth. But we don't know what's going to happen with water. There's a drought right now. I don't know if that's going to get better over the next 20 years or stay the same or get worse. But my suggestion would be native plants for everything to minimize the impact with water. Also, we don't know what's going to happen as infrastructure comes in and puts in plants and landscaping. That's going to probably drive coyotes into the area too. Because I think rodents may come in looking for places to dig holes and things. So I'm just thinking about what's going to happen in the future on that. But the other side of this is, as I understand it, this is my first time for this group. As I understand it, there's something like 900 planned residences or something or other.
Well, actually, the general plan articulated about 900, but since then, the city council has approved the housing element, which pops that up to roughly 1,350 units.
Okay, if you look at the cost of rent these days, and it's gonna go sky high over the next 20 years, of course. You're not going to have one person living in each of these units. You're looking at probably, I don't know, 2.4, 2.5, 3, whatever it might be. So the number of vehicles you're talking about, look at this figure 3 even on there, and the number of residents there, the traffic's going to be horrendous.
Yeah, so, sir, can I talk about that for a second? Actually, residential density is not the driver of traffic. It isn't. The studies are so clear. What drives traffic is twofold. One is you have through traffic getting onto the freeway, which it doesn't matter what happens here. And that's hopefully going to be fixed with the interchange. The second is retail. Retail drives a lot of traffic, all right? Back and forth, people turning into the Sprouts, into the Smart & Final. The residential density is actually a minimal driver of traffic. The studies are very clear on this.
Well,
So-
I'm looking at these residences are not going to have garages or anything. They're going to be parking somewhere else. So
They're parking in garages in their buildings.
Okay, but will they have storage areas in their units, or are they just going to have everything within their own dwellings?
Well, it would actually be a function of what each individual developer would want to provide. That's really a market condition. So if I'm looking for an apartment and I don't need storage, I really shouldn't pay for that. Likewise, if I want a lot of storage, I should look for an apartment that provides me a lot of storage, because I don't know what the right amount of storage is, because it's different for different people. And so that's why we have, a free market there. Developers know that better than any of us do, and they are trying to provide the maximum best product for the least cost. That's their goal. And so they're going to make all these choices. Those are important points, but I don't know enough to have an opinion one way or the other.
Okay, and has the group or the developers and planners looked at vehicle miles traveled, what that's going to come out as?
Absolutely. That will be done because that's part of CEQA. So yes, it's not done yet because we just started this process. But I do know that when you infill areas like this, and the reason why vehicle miles traveled why the CEQA was changed to support vehicle miles traveled and not level of service, we're getting into the weeds here, I know, but it's because vehicle miles traveled actually provides the true traffic cost of building this. And these kind of developments actually are very good on VMT. Whereas if we take the same number of units that we're showing here, and we build out further in the suburbs somewhere, we will have many more VMTs because people are going to have to drive to everything. So this kind of development is better than more sprawl out further and further out. Imagine if they moved to San Bernardino County and they still have to drive through here.
Sure. Now, last thing. Speaking of levels of service, is there any estimate what's going to happen, let's say, at where Gentle Springs would be and Golden Springs is, where across the Diamond Bar Boulevard? Are those going to go to status quo or go to a level F possibly?
Well, I don't know if you heard my discussion of the intersections and how we're treating those, but there really wouldn't be, we're actually adding a left turn lane, and that's really where the problem is. So we think, at the very least, it'll be the same. We actually think we can make improvements. So, but it might be the same. These kind of neighborhoods, though, I mean, I'll be honest, there is a trade-off. If you want traffic to move completely smoothly with never a hiccup, then don't do a town center. Because you can't do it. It's impossible. If you want a town center, you have to accept some recognition that a lot of people are going to come at the same time. And if you try to accommodate all of them in 4 or 5 lanes of highway, you're not going to like the result. And your children will be laughing at why you did that. So that's just what I've noticed. Yes. Oh, wait a minute. Let's get this mic here.
I do appreciate all your work that you've done. I've been here most of the week, some of my topics that I've talked to you about. One thing that you didn't cover, and I know it's not your particular area, but I've seen parking structures from the East Coast to the Midwest, all the way around the coast, and in my old hometown of Santa Monica. And one of the things that always comes up is public safety.
Mm-hmm.
Santa Monica has had shootings, killings, cars have gone off because they've had multi-levels of parking. Now, without law enforcement around here at all, our nearest one is the substation over in Walnut. Multiple parking spaces, I don't care how many people live there, is going to be a big issue. And I think that should really be addressed, especially if you're going to live here at Walker. But I know that hasn't been put into discussion. I know that's not your expertise.
Yeah,
but that's a concern.
I can say this, that developers that I know really don't want that to happen, right? I mean, they really don't.
Who does?
Really, but it's really not good for their business. So they spend a lot of time and effort in security. They really do. Now, again, I am not a security expert, but I do know that's the case. I also know, because I am actually a resident of Santa Monica, that my neighbors complain about things that simply don't happen. I mean, there's a lot of hysteria about ridiculousness. So all of that makes the news, but I actually feel very safe there. So, it's a big city, so yes, stuff does happen, but it's not it doesn't affect anybody I know from going into the downtown. So, and you also remember, Santa Monica is unique because it has a huge tourist population, and so tourists are very ripe for crime. Right. And that's not really an issue here.
Thank you.
This man, and then we're going to get to you.
Yeah, this is my first day here, but I really like what I see. But is there like a timeline on any of this? I kind of noticed you said there was this first phase.
Well, I don't know that. I'm guessing on the first phase.
Okay, so that's just a guess.
Yeah.
So I know there's a lot of owners involved and so forth, but is that guess from at least some of the researcher talks you've had?
Yeah, that guess is not just, I didn't pick that.
It's not a wag.
It's not a wag. It's an informed guess.
Okay.
But it's still a guess.
Okay, sure.
I don't want to go into more of that, but it is an informed guess.
So is there some kind of timeline that
Well, that I
there
don't
is?
know exactly for that phase. I mean, because a lot of it has to do with things that are in no one's control. So, today the stock market went down 1,000 points. Right? I mean, that's a lot. Now, all of us probably, if we have 401ks, felt a little poorer today, right? And, none of us can predict what's going to happen in a year. And suppose we have such incredible inflation that they don't pencil these projects. So I can't give you a number. No one can give you. The developer who owns the properties can't give you that number for sure because they don't know. So it's all a guess.
One more.
Yeah.
Is this available Can we?
Yeah, it'll be online.
It'll be online. Great.
Not only that, but this whole thing has been videotaped and it'll be on YouTube.
Okay.
So
I just
you
wanna
really
show
want
this
fast.
to my wife.
Netflix is going to pick it up.
All right. Thank you.
The city gets a cut of that, by the way. Indeed, my son already asked. I sent him the first chat, when he asked if they've picked it up for a second season. So, yes, sir.
Well, thank you for waiting.
Yes. Well, the best for last now. Oh, I don't know if it's last, but it's the best for near last.
Well, I don't know whether it's the best, but I think we've heard a lot of good things.
Yeah.
And let me give you a little bit of background. I'm a licensed civil engineer.
Oh, good.
Retired from Metropolitan Water District, got involved in a lot of planning. I was born and raised in South Africa.
Uh-huh.
Got my degree from the University of London. Been around Europe, very familiar with Europe, and been in Diamond Farm for the last 30 plus years.
Got it.
So just give you a bit of
Okay,
background.
good.
So
You've given it to everybody, too, by the way.
yeah, everybody. Oh, but you were addressing everything to me.
Got it. That's true.
Anyway, jokes apart, just being familiar with the area, there are 2 gas stations there, and there's a pumping plant
There's actually 4.
in that area.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And there is also a water pumping plant. Yes.
Yeah, that I was aware of. So, I think if I were looking at it, I would look at it conceptually first.
Yes.
Look at what we have, and then look at what we want.
Got it.
We are doing that to a certain extent, but we have drawings with lanes drawn and things like that. We are talking about it as if that is going to be the design. But if I'm not mistaken, that is not the design we are necessarily
No, not at
talking
all.
about, are we?
No, it isn't.
Okay. So having had a lot of experience of these in Europe and in England and not much here, I would like to suggest that this is like a small village within a village.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've seen happen in Europe is they don't allow traffic in there.
Yeah.
Just close it.
Yeah. It's a
And
great idea.
Just close it, have public transportation,
Yeah.
let the buses go there. So where the 60, up to where the 60 freeway is, from there up to maybe Golden Springs, make that accessible for living or parking.
Can you put
you
the
have
mic
2
nearer?
cross lanes.
Put the mic nearer to your mouth.
Yeah, sorry. You're talking about 2 lanes,
Sure.
10 feet wide on either side?
No. They're
On the-
11. They're 11.
10, 11.
Well, it makes
Call
a
what you like.
difference, actually.
Well, I mean, we're not designing.
But
we just-
sir, let's keep it moving because I don't want people to.
Well,
we're not
if
going to debate the details here.
That's exactly why I said 10 and you said 11.
Right,
Don't
okay,
be
sorry.
aggravating the detail. So, very briefly, have buses go there.
So, do you think Diamond Bar Boulevard should be closed to everything but buses? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah,
Well, that's an
I think
interesting
people-
thought. And had I suggested that here, possibly a riot. But it is an interesting thought. And actually, we did think of that. And somebody else has also suggested it. And I'm happy to entertain that thought if I thought that there were a lot more people that felt that way. I haven't heard that many suggest that move. In fact, some people are highly suspicious of even what we're suggesting here. So, but if you think that there's a constituency for investigating, closing Diamond Bar except the buses, I would be happy to explore that.
Well, I'm just throwing it out there. There are a lot of people here
Yeah.
who've expressed their views, and I picked up on some of it.
Sure.
And I'm trying to build on that thought.
Right. Okay. Well, we can certainly look at that.
Look at that and look at it from look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Have a new concept of it.
Yeah.
have a totally new concept of it.
Okay.
And do like they do in, you mentioned Europe. That's how the Europeans do it.
Okay, I got it. I'd like to make sure that everybody else has, in case there are other questions, that would be good.
Well, I'll.
Do you have more questions?
No,
Okay.
no, I have
Okay.
no idea. This is a new starting point.
Okay, that's good. We will look at that. We will look at,
We should look at it together.
me and you?
No, as a group, as a city.
So, yeah,
City of Diamond Bar.
I
There are
think,
a lot of people with a lot of ideas.
well, that's why we spent a week here listening to a lot of ideas, sir.
Didn't even know that was.
Well, I'm sorry that happened. I do apologize that you didn't.
It's not your fault. It
Well-
just didn't happen.
You
Me,
can,
I'm
you
not.
can still add comments.
You can still add comments, but this is a continuous process, and we are constantly getting more and more feedback, and we're adjusting. The plan you saw tonight reflects a lot of feedback that we've gotten all week. Now, we're going to continue to get feedback, and we're going to continue to evolve it. This is not final, but in order for us to present any idea, for me to stand up here and suggest any changes to Diamond Bar, I have to have an idea. I know how it works.
It's a starting point.
Yeah, that's right. It is a starting point. Any other questions out there? Yes, this lady right here. Perfect.
First, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank
I
you.
have to say that I am super excited at the thought of not having to drive outside of my city to be able to enjoy something like this.
Cool.
I will say that it's nice to be, I go to Pasadena, I go to Brea, I go to Monrovia, I go to Claremont. I'll go anywhere that makes me feel like I'm having a good time and I can shop if I want. I can just enjoy walking around, even window shopping. My husband loves it because I don't spend a lot of money if I do that. But just the thought of knowing that this is something that's a possibility in my own backyard is exciting to me. And I feel like I'm the kind of person, and hopefully there's more people here that feel this way, more residents, that love our city and are willing, like you said, there's some exchanges that we're going to have to make. We're going to have to endure some things, but I think if we think of the greater good, not only just for myself, but I think about the fact that I'm going to stay in Diamond Bar for how long as I can stay because I love our city. And I think about the future of my family, and I think, wouldn't it be wonderful when the kids come over and when they get married and hopefully they have some grandkids, we can go down to our little town center and enjoy a nice family time? And
Yes,
so when
it
I
would be.
think about that, it makes me super excited. So I thank you for encouraging that vision for some of us that go different places and have to go far to look for those opportunities. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
One thought I had, additional thought I had, was in terms of a community garden, and don't know if that had been thought of previously by anyone.
Yeah, that's a great idea. There are a couple of strategies for that, which we haven't yet explored, but we will, because we've heard that a lot, actually.
Great. My second question, you were mentioning a couple times about, is this a place to go to or to go through? And I'm wondering how, I personally believe it would be a place to go to, as I think I've heard several other folks mention this evening. How will we be going about that process to make that determination? Because that would have a large impact on the development of the site.
Sure. Yeah, and it's a great point. So we're going to go through this process, and we're going to do an EIR, which is the requirement, and that's going to determine, if there's a kind of traffic feasibility to this. And then if it is, and it's approved this way or some way like this, then the city would have to decide if it wants to pursue this, beyond the plan, and then probably pursue engineering studies to make sure that this happens. And obviously there'd be some give and take with Caltrans because it is an access to the freeway and the like. So, there's a lot of steps to getting something like this done. I actually worked on a road diet in Oceanside, which is in northern San Diego County. We started that process in 2009. Then there was this big recession and the city came close to bankruptcy. So it kind of went on hold for many, many years. But then they came back and they did that whole thing with the pylons for about a half mile. That's a 3-mile stretch that we worked on. So it's a lot. And then that sort of worked. And then they actually painted stripes and bike lanes. So that's kind of where they are now, right? In the painting phase. So it's painted, it's done, it's there. They've narrowed some of to 2 lanes each way. So that's 13 years. And so, it's a while. It's none of the council people are still there. It's all new. Who knows? I mean, it takes time. Now, granted, that was a 3-mile stretch, so that's a lot. This is a tiny area we're talking about, so hopefully it'll be easier. But that was a road that had a lot more traffic because it was the old Route 1 that went, and so we had the same debates, exact same debates, And one of the wonderful things we heard was that, there were people who were worried about folks who would take the 5 and it was crowded. They would get off the 5 and cut through Oceanside and get back on. And I said, well, do you like that? Do you want that? Because you don't have to have that. And it never occurred to folks that it wasn't a given. Like we had to accept that. So that was a big aha moment that the city controlled the road. They could do what they wanted. And the second thing was, one of the merchants who was a beloved merchant had a burger place, but it was a really well-known, super successful burger place. People were saying, well, he's not going to like it because, it's going to hurt the traffic and they're going to have to go slower and all. And he said, on the contrary, I love this because you know why? All those cars going by, if they can't stop because they're going 45 miles an hour, it really doesn't do me any good. I want them going slower. So it was actually a pretty amazing moment in the turning around. So the answer to your question is I don't know. It's a lot of steps, and you start this way and you go from there. Yeah. Yes.
Just a thought. This could be a template for developing the shopping centers in the rest of Diamond Bar.
Yes.
And if we can have a template for Diamond Bar, then more power to Diamond Bar.
Well,
the
that's
way Diamond Bar has evolved since it got incorporated in 1989. It's staggered from crisis to crisis, and I'm personally tired of it.
Well, that's a really interesting point. Thank you for making that. Any other questions or comments? You are certainly encouraged. Welcome. Oh, there's still one. Tentative, it looks like, but there nonetheless.
Yeah, this is a very upscale plan, which I'm all in favor of. I like upscale. However, one of the things that I'm thinking about is the farther north end of Diamond Bar, where like the bowling alley is, and then south. What will be done, or what could be done, I guess I should say, to those ends of Diamond Bar to make it a cohesive whole instead of this being very dramatically different from either end?
Well, that's another study. It's a very interesting study. The interesting question, I don't know because I haven't studied these areas. And so that's something for your council to think about as it goes forward. I don't remember what your general plan says about those areas because I didn't really focus on that. So that's probably a place to start to see what the city itself has imagined for those areas. But I honestly haven't looked at it. So but it's a great question.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that would be the concern I would have, eliminating access to Diamond Bar Boulevard. It seems to be that the people north of the freeway, their only way to get through here is through Diamond Bar Boulevard.
Sure.
And and if you you know, you've got that other street that you think you're going to use, but then that goes through housing development, so you add traffic there, so.
Yeah,
my
that's the funny
concern.
thing about whenever you close a street, the traffic doesn't actually disappear. It just goes somewhere else. And so, you know, I think you could make Diamond Bar Boulevard into a nicer street that still carries an adequate amount of traffic and the like, and not eliminate it. I mean, I think cities have streets with cars, and that's okay, as long as they're being managed. So this is going to be, wait, does anybody else have a question before? I'm going to let this gentleman have the last question or comment. Not the last word, though.
You have the last one.
Well, exactly.
You mentioned Caltrans,
Yes.
and that's a very, very good point.
Yeah.
We are getting the 57-60 intersection done.
Yeah.
And I think once that is done,
It'll help.
you'll find that people's driving habits are going to change,
I'm sure.
and Diamond Bar will not be an option. Getting an arterial right through a shopping center or 2 or 3 shopping centers is
Yeah.
not the way.
Well, sir,
you know
I
it.
promise we will explore your idea. I promise we will. So that's the only thing I can say here, because we haven't. So
That's all I can ask.
that's all. Yes. Okay, thank you all. I really want you, if you haven't, you know, if you have more comments, maybe you didn't want to say it because, you know, write it on the wall, put the Post-it notes. It's all, we read all of this stuff. There's actually some really interesting stuff here. I mean, amazing stuff. I mean, aquarium. Somebody suggested an aquarium here. It's a little out there, but you know. So please do that. We'll see you again soon, in a couple months. But until then, have a great weekend, and thanks for coming out.